right, here we are, and welcome back, everybody, to another live stream here on Suns Digest. As you all know, I'm your host, Bruce Veliz, but today we have a very special guest here joining us on the channel to chat about the Suns and give his takes on what this team should really do. It's, as you all know, from PHNX Sports, co-host of the Sun Devils and the Phoenix Suns, and the one and only Strawberry Swirl Girl on that cast, Erik Ruby. Erik, thank you for joining us today. How you doing, my guy?
Oh, dude, I'm doing good. It was another frosty take
Mm-hmm.
Thursday. Yes, I am a strawberry swirl girl, but don't get twisted. I can also be a brownie batter baddie. I can be whatever it is for the frosties. But no, man, I'm super excited. I've loved being able to connect with you, and honestly, at the end of the day, I think the Suns community is a great place, and there's so many awesome people and shows and content and writing and all of that I think it's as cool as if we work together as much as possible. And I'm excited to chat about such a cursed team.
Yeah. I mean, you are right with the cursing of the team, and I appreciate you already, showing your support. We have had our chats in the comment section on PHNX, but finally we get to sit face to face and have these discussions, and I think it's going to be a great one for all the fans in here. We got some people already in the chat: Jazz Salazar, Phoenix Suns #1 fan, Jeffrey Catalino. So thank you guys for popping by. I'm sure there'll be some other people as well asking some questions. But Erik, I feel like the main point of discussion, something that obviously swirling around, and kind of the big talk for the Suns is revolving around Kevin Durant. And we don't have to go as much into it as we like, but we can kind of just go over the main sticking points, which is just each rumor basically coming out every hour is just contradicting itself, right? It's just one thing here from Shams, one thing from Dwayne Ranking, one thing from Mark Stein, and you appreciate them obviously doing their work trying to get us the best out there with the Suns, but it's definitely nauseating at this point to just hear all this nonsense and jibber jabber without really seeing anything really concrete so far.
Yeah, it's tough, especially when you look at it from like a media perspective where, you know, you got to be on alert at every single second if anything happens. And there are some like legitimate big updates mixed in there as well. And it's actually pretty easy to miss some stuff because so much is being thrown out there. At the end of the day, honestly, it's great for the Suns, or at least it has the potential to be great, because if a lot of what this reporting is true, and there are multiple teams at least interested, you never know how much of, oh, they're not going to do this, oh, they're not going to do that is actually true. But the more team names that are involved, the better, because it feels like it's at least an active market. So I don't know if it's better the longer it drags on, but I do think that the amount of stuff that's being thrown out there at the end of the day might benefit Phoenix in the long run.
Well, that's the good thing too, because all these discussions surrounding around Kevin Durant at least has that kind of like pull. Because I know a lot of people have discussed that at least there's teams interested in him. There's 3 or 4 teams, maybe even more, that are at least willing to gauge into those conversations. At least it's not just 1 or 2 teams, similar to a Jimmy Butler scenario that we were kind of in just a couple months ago, where we were trying to get the best package or trying to do something like that, where he's very kind of just stagnant on what he wants to do. At least he's being a little bit more freeing with that, and I guess it gives some news as well for the Suns as well, with the draft and everything really coming around. We kind of just need as much as we can kind of get. So having the Kevin Durant news kind of spiraling around is pretty good. And you mentioned there's just so much going on. You do miss stuff. I remember I woke up one of the other days and I had like 8 alerts, and I was like doing a video and I completely forgot like 2 of them. Like I forgot to talk about the Raptors just because there's just so much going on with this team.
Yeah, and we kind of feel ourselves the same way. And then it's also at the same time, you look back at the last month or so, and it's also like, well, damn, it's all been kind of repetitive too. Like, how am I missing so much? How is so much being thrown out there? But I'm still sitting here thinking about, will the Rockets trade number 10 Jabari and Tari? I'm still thinking about, will the San Antonio Spurs part with anybody besides Devin Vassell? And now, sure, the Miami Heat have been around, but now it's been a couple of weeks with them. So it feels like the more that gets thrown out there, the more you can kind of see what's consistent. But it I just need it to have a conclusion, more so because I'm just ready to talk about like actual basketball stuff. Even if Kevin Durant returns, like that's technically a conclusion, not a likely one, but a conclusion. And I would just like to talk about the basketball fit. Even if it's not like, hey, this team's going to win a championship, I'm pretty tired of, hey, there's some slop out there and this and that. And then there's legitimate reporting too, like Mark Stein, who we work with. I know Gambo's very reputable as well, like Flex as well. Like there's definitely stuff out there to keep note of, so you can't not talk about it, not keep track. But I just want to talk about hoops sometime, man.
Yeah, same here. I feel like with all the kind of like hyperbole and kind of discussing who could potentially be here, it's kind of tough because you kind of, like you mentioned, just want to see who's going to be here on this team. So then you can have those discussions like, oh, does this guy fit well with Devin Booker? Does this kind of go into that alignment or this vision that this team really has? And we can kind of put the puzzle pieces together then as well with, if they do get another draft pick or something like that, who can really fit in and who should they target? Because with us being at pick 29 as well, it's a big kind of drop off, not a big drop off, but comparative to at least maybe 10 or 14 from some of those guys that might be picked around 17 or 20, maybe with the Heat package or the Timberwolves package. It's a little bit closer with some of those guys falling, but some of those guys at that higher potential obviously could be more impactful for Phoenix as well down the line.
Yeah, I just want to see what Brian Gregory does as well. Like how do you handle this? I don't think that trading Kevin Durant is necessarily like the hardest thing, but it definitely could be a big failure, and it could be one right off the bat. So, there's a ton of layers to it, and I just need it to happen. But I feel like, honestly, now the later we get into this week, I'm like, oh, is this gonna be like the day before the draft? Like, are we gonna have to deal with this for another like 5 days? Ugh.
Yeah, I texted John about that the other day. I was like, are we really going to be just teased till the draft day and just have to deal with this? Or can we just finally get it done? And I made a prediction that I thought it was going to get done earlier this week, like Monday or Tuesday. Unfortunately, that did not fall through. Maybe we do see it come by with the finals, being on right now. We could potentially see it when the finals do end on, if they do end tonight, potentially this weekend or even tomorrow, or if the finals do end on Sunday, kind of going there until early to next week. But I think if we had to wait till Monday, Tuesday, potentially even Wednesday to have the trade done, that would be just a little bit worse for the Phoenix Suns, because then you kind of realize if they are getting one of those picks in the draft, they're probably calling other guys to figure out who's available at that pick, but it's definitely a little bit harder for them to kind of find their concrete guy as well.
Right, and you don't know if you're gonna have to give up your own pick or something like that as well. And, then you also kind of get to the self-imposed deadline where it's like, Kevin Durant doesn't technically need to be traded before the draft, but everybody knows that that's the best outcome for everybody involved. So your leverage, your negotiating power might, draw a little shorter, but, and I'm not trying to be like Homer or optimistic or whatever, but you got to acknowledge that both sides of it is true, which is the closer you get to the draft, maybe the Rockets get more desperate. Maybe the Spurs get more desperate. Maybe the Timberwolves get more desperate. Maybe Kevin Durant gets more desperate and he just wants it to wrap up as well. Like, as much as it might not play into the Suns' favor for it to go longer, at the end of the day, we really don't know who holds the final say behind the scenes, because a lot of the times as fans or media members, we sit back and we say, oh yeah, this is exactly what's happening. This is what's going on. And then something completely out of nowhere happens and it's like, well, we didn't see that coming. Like, that is still on the table here as well. There's a chance that a lot of people eat their words about what KD gets traded for, and there's also a chance that everybody who thinks that he's worth more than scraps is wrong. Like, that's kind of another fascinating part of this, is there's so many different ways to look at it that it feels like there's very polar opposite stances like everywhere.
Yeah, I feel like also with the Suns fan base as well, how it's kind of divvied up in per se is how that kind of, I guess, response is also kind of gratitude from some aspects of it as well, which is a little bit difficult with like the stands and stuff like that kind of factoring into that. And going into kind of those packages as well, we kind of mentioned those teams that have obviously been interested. I believe there was an update today. Jake Fisher said like that he was not banking on it, but would say that his like likely prediction or guess would that he'd be going to the Miami Heat. Shams Charania kind of came out today as well, kind of saying that it was, I believe, the Heat and the Rockets that were kind of the front runners as well, or something like that. I'm not really much with the Spurs. What are your kind of thoughts on that? Who would you say most likely is the team to land Kevin Durant as of today, if you would make your guess?
It kind of just feels like the Miami Heat, because it was the Spurs for so long. And I remember I went on a San Antonio radio station and they're like, oh, what do you think is going to happen? And I was like, oh, I definitely feel like it's going to be the Spurs, right? Which shows how much things change because now they're not even really put in this finalist category, which maybe is just leverage on the Suns' part. They want to make them feel like they're out of the game. But, it's most likely also true because of the assets that they're saying no about. So I feel like Miami has shown the most interest, has been interested in Durant for the longest. Durant would go play there. He would command, some salary filler for sure, but Miami has multiple salaries that people would consider bad. Duncan Robinson, Terry Rozier, and then, like an average starting small forward, Andrew Wiggins, who's on a big deal, who, would be something, but isn't exactly going to stop you from trading for Kevin Durant. it's the hinging point of Kel'el Ware, and out of all the hinging points, so for the Rockets, their hinging point is probably the 27 and 29 pick or Jabari Antari, right? For Minnesota, it's, the fact that Katie doesn't want to go there. And for San Antonio, it's Stephon Castle, it's number 2, it's De'Aaron Fox. Out of all the hinging points, like Kel'el Ware clearly has the least amount of value and is probably the most likely for a team to swing on, especially a team that's kind of in purgatory like the Heat. So it all kind of lines up, and honestly, even getting Kel'el Ware as high as I am on him, if that's like the main return in a package in like number 20 for Kevin Durant compared to what he was traded for before, that is kind of like him going for scraps. So I think kind of all sides can end up being right if KD to Miami happens, which makes it to me feel like the most likely.
Yeah, I could see that. I know that you're very high on Kel'el Ware. You mentioned that on PHNX, and a lot of other people in the Suns media space have been high on him as well. So I think that he would be a great fit as well with this team. Personally, I thought he was going to go around the lottery where when he was selected by the Miami Heat. So I was very keen on a guy in Kel'el Ware, and I thought that he could have made a very big impact for some of these teams. And I think with the Suns, he'd be able to do that as well. But I do agree with you that when you look at that package kind of retrospectively as a whole, when you look at guys like Duncan Robinson, who basically would be playing the same role as Grayson Allen, but he is on, I believe, a non-guaranteed contract, so I don't know if the Suns would even potentially waive that, but that's something they could get out of too if they considered. Andrew Wiggins, who I know has been mentioned by Gambo as well, as like not someone that the team has been really like keen on as well, like potentially could be flipped in a deal, so that's someone to keep an eye on. And then also you mentioned Terry Rozier, who could be one of those other contracts that they could use as well. I feel like with Terry Rozier, that kind of deal is kind of just for the Suns to I guess get salary relief for the next offseason or for the next kind of big trade that they are really looking for. Whereas comparative to Wiggins, maybe that's someone that you can kind of have for that retool, restructure. But I think the Heat definitely have an enticing package. I know you've mentioned the Spurs as a team that you guys kind of think has like the weakest package, and I would agree with that. I do believe that with the 14th overall pick that it has some value, but the players that we do kind of get in return, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, they are solid, but don't necessarily fit the Suns. And like you, I was riding high. I wrote articles about him going to the Spurs, and I was like, yeah, he's going to go there. Finally, I'm going to get my prediction right. And unfortunately, it's just seeming like that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, I don't see them being an organization that gets super desperate. Again, you can always keep the door open. At the end of the day, and you can be out on Kevin Durant for age or injury reasons, and it's like I get those concerns, but I don't have really many legitimate complaints about him on the basketball court, which at the end of the day is the most important thing if you're one of these teams like San Antonio. Maybe the turnovers, that's the only thing. And even that, it's such a small negative compared to the overwhelming amounts of positive that he brings that, if I am the Spurs, and I might be willing at the end of the day to say, you know what, if Wemby really wants it and we're worried about maybe some of his long-term health, or we just know that these windows don't last forever, screw it. You can have Stephon Castle because we have Dylan Harper anyway, right? I don't think anything's on the table, if they don't have both of those assets. And I don't think anything is realistically going to the Suns, but, desperation is something that can just kind of come out of nowhere. And maybe Houston feels that way because Ime Udoka signs this big extension with the franchise, and the franchise is investing in him. And he's reportedly been the one who's super in on bringing Kevin Durant there. And if any team needed half-court scoring more than anybody after this postseason, it is the Houston Rockets. So maybe they get desperate, and then guess what? One desperate team drives up the price of another desperate team. So maybe you end up getting a better package from San Antonio. I doubt it. The only way that you honor what Durant wants is if you get 2 equal packages, and at that point, there's no reason to make him mad.
Yeah, that's how I kind of see it with it too. And I think you mentioned Houston as well, their hinge piece being Jabari Smith, maybe even Tari Eason. I feel like Jabari with the fit with Kevin Durant honestly doesn't make the most sense. I feel like that's why it's kind of confusing to me why he would be a little bit of a hinging point for them. Obviously, maybe they could use him in another deal down the line to get some more assets. That's why they feel like they don't want to give it up, obviously. But I feel like as a sticking point for the Phoenix Suns, that would be a great piece for them to get, because you guys have mentioned that he's a solid rebounder, he's a solid defender, and I think he can be, for this Phoenix Suns team, one of those prospects that you kind of retool and kind of build up. I feel like for the Phoenix Suns, that's what they have to really kind of evaluate with some of these younger guys. They're not wanting to strike out on some older guys. I know people have some concerns with Gobert. I personally like him, but I think that that kind of side of things skews people a little bit the wrong way. But trying to find these investment pieces that can still grow, but also turn into something with Devin Booker in 2 to 3 years is the key for the Suns.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And with Jabari Smith Jr. specifically, the enticing part is he might end up just being 7 feet tall at the end of
Hmm.
the day. And he can play the forward, he can play the five. He has like the idea of a shot. I wouldn't say he's a shooter, but he certainly is not broke from that range. And you would definitely be banking on him developing that three, whether he's in the deal or not. You know, if you're Phoenix, you need that, and if you're Houston, for him and KD to play together, he's going to have to be a lot better of a shooter, at least for it to reach the levels that you want to. It would still work because it's Kevin Durant, right? So that's still gonna work. But I agree with I don't get him being the hinge piece. Now I feel like more of the hinge piece is Jabari and Tari together.
Hmm.
But even then, those are two good players, right? And they bring good defense. I mean, Kevin Durant played good defense this year too, and he didn't play it in this way where I think one more year on his body is going to stop him from playing the same type of defense. But if I'm the Houston Rockets and it's clear that I have to win right now, I'm giving up total 20 points per game through two players, right? And then Jalen Green, who a lot of people consider a negative asset, maybe, or maybe just one of those players, and the 10 pick or a future pick or whatever it is, and I can bring maybe this picture perfect player that can play defense, especially help sign and weak side defense, that is still an elite shot maker, that was in the MVP conversation at the beginning of the season when the Suns were actually winning, and can hit that level and doesn't overlap with any of the other pieces that we have at our core. He could play with Alperen Şengün. He could play with Amen Thompson. He could play with Fred VanVleet. If you keep Jalen Green, he can play with Jalen Green. He could play with Dylan Brooks. Like, all of this fits and works for you. I don't get why you would be that hesitant to trade for Durant, unless you don't want to do it for a 1 year rental. But nothing's indicated that he wouldn't re-sign in Houston. Just not it's his number one option.
Exactly. And I think if you take a team like Houston this year who struggled offensively with all those kind of things that you just displayed, and you put Kevin Durant in a series versus Golden State or potentially even versus Minnesota if they win that series, it's very competitive and they can hold their own, potentially even get to the Western Conference Finals. And then you think about just Durant getting added with Amen Thompson growing, Alperen Şengün growing, all these other pieces that they have. Maybe if they do keep a Cam Whitmore, who has been mentioned in some fringe talks, I think is kind of held out of it now. But a guy like that, a guy like Dylan Brooks, depending on if he still stays, that's still a solid wing enough core around Kevin Durant and Fred VanVleet and Alperen Şengün to once again kind of put you in those conversations in the West, to where you really shouldn't be asking at this point, like, is this what I should be doing? I feel like this for the Houston Rockets should be a clear-cut decision, like you have been saying.
And I get the age, you know.
Hmm.
If I'm the Rockets, that's what I'm leaking, right? And I think at the end of the day, it is more smoke from them than maybe any other team. You
Yeah.
know, they've said they don't want Devin Booker. Okay, yeah, that's right. You're the one who made that decision. Sure. You think Jalen Green's better than Devin Booker? Yeah, man. I'm sure you do. Uh huh.
I think
You
that was
know,
the
it's
funniest thing that came out this offseason from their side.
And again, I get it. Play the game, right?
Yep.
The Suns have definitely been trying to play the game and have been playing it very, very hard in a lot of different ways. They've been playing the game this media cycle, which maybe is a good thing, maybe is a bad thing. We'll see what happens at the end. But, you know, the age, and I get it, but you just signed Steven Adams to an extension, who isn't as
Hmm.
old as KD. He's like just about 30, even though he seems like he's way older,
Yep.
right? But you are committed to Fred VanVleet as well. You're going to renegotiate with him and most likely re-sign him. You have a coach that wants to coach veterans, and you know we've seen LeBron and Chris Paul play effectively into their 40s, and you know Kevin Durant wants to go play for you. I mean, to me, and I get maybe if Suns fans are like laughing because it's the same story about when the Suns traded for him, right? Oh, Kevin Durant wants to go to you. You trade for Kevin Durant. But the difference is, like, the packages that we're talking about here, the hinge points that we're talking about here, are peanuts to what the Suns gave up in exchange for Kevin Durant, which is why it's so confusing to me, because to me he's still a top 15 player in the league, and if he was healthy for maybe 6 more games last season, he'd be probably considered top 10, because the Suns would have made the play-in and it would have been like, oh, he was the best player on their team. So a lot of that confuses me.
Yeah, I think the narrative of that, like you just displayed, is kind of whack, because if he qualified for those 65 games and I think if the Suns weren't even in a better spot, he could have contended for All NBA third team or All NBA second team this season with the stats that he provided and for the effort that he put there on the court. But if the Suns had a better record as well, with him, like you said, being available to play in those games, and obviously that was a key hindrance for the Suns, was injuries this season throughout the entire year through their big three and just other stars in general. I do think that if the Suns were like a 7 or potentially even an 8 seed in the playoffs, that would obviously be resemblant across the NBA. So I don't think that that's a crazy take to say, and I feel like maybe that would have maybe increased his value a little bit, obviously, which is unfortunate for the Phoenix Suns. But I feel like a lot of teams are kind of disregarding some of those older veterans, because even though Jimmy Butler, who got traded, might not be worth that $60 million extension, he still provided a great effort with that team in Golden State this playoffs. And I think a guy like Kevin Durant, like you mentioned, Steph Curry, LeBron James, can all do that still at this point in their career too.
Well, you know, I think that everybody knows that at this point, but this is maybe the last time that front offices can use this excuse for players of this caliber. It's like, okay, you know, okay, LeBron did it. Cool. Okay, Chris Paul did it. Cool. Okay, Kevin Durant did it. Okay, cool. Like, you know, this is getting to the point where athletes in their late 30s, especially for basketball, you know, a game that, yes, is defined by athleticism, but, you know, skill and your brain matters just as much, especially for some of these all-time athletes who, when they hit their floor as an athlete, like 40 to 45, you don't change that much, and they're still better than 50% of the league, right? So Kevin Durant's one of those guys. And so to me, if I'm trying to trade for Kevin Durant, and I saw what happened with the Suns and giving up so much, I'm doing everything that's been done. I'm calling him old. I'm saying I don't believe in him. I'm saying I'd be hesitant to add him to my young timeline. You know, maybe he's a top 25 player. In reality, having watched this dude in a ton of basketball all over last season, he's still a top 15 player in this league. And I think that you could still have an argument for top 10 if he was put in a better position, especially by Mike Budenholzer and the team around him. And honestly, like, I don't love the dude, right? Like, you know, it's not like he's this franchise legend that you have these like blinders on for. Like, I'm just calling it how I see it. The dude is still one of the best players in the game. And I think that teams know that, but they also know that this is maybe the only opportunity they'll have to get somebody of Kevin Durant's caliber at the price that he'll be available for.
Yeah, I think you kind of put it there perfectly, especially with him being on that 1-year contract as well. Definitely kind of makes it a little bit more of a question mark for some of those wild card teams, or just any other teams in general, really across the league, to, I guess, kind of put in all their big stones out in that trade package to really go out and get a guy like Kevin Durant. But turning away from a guy in Kevin Durant, I want to mention two other guys that could potentially be on the trade block as well for the Phoenix Suns, as Mark Stein in one of his latest Substacks also had this when talking about Kevin Durant, relating to guys like Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal, talking about how they could potentially still be on the trade block, maybe in a Kevin Durant trade or potentially in separate deals to do some stuff. What would you like to see the Suns kind of go out and get for players like that? I know Steven loves those POA defenders, but what are you really looking for the Phoenix Suns to go out and get?
I'll cop out at first, and then I'll give details afterwards. A lot of it depends on what they get back for the Kevin Durant trade.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
If they get Nick Claxton back in the Kevin Durant trade, if they draft a center in the top 10, if they get Kel'el Ware, I don't think I as much would say trade Grayson Allen to the Magic for Goga Batanze, right? I think center, as much as I love point of attack defenders, and I think that that's something this team desperately needs, I think they also desperately need a starting center. So if there's any way that you can flip one of those guys for a starting center, which I think is unlikely, Goga's probably the best that you can do. And maybe Orlando doesn't do that because they just traded for shooting. They still need more, but they might be able to talk themselves into, okay, that's fine. So if you get a center in a Kevin Durant trade, I think trading for point of attack defenders, or honestly trading for draft picks. If you get a good enough return in the Kevin Durant trade player-wise, right, and you draft well this year, and so you're like, okay, we have the Miami Heat package. We end up with Thomas Sorber at 20. He falls. We get Kel'el Ware, so that's our 4 and our 5, right? We still have Nick Richards, and we still have Oso, so front court is set. We have our own pick still at 29. We get another wing, or we grab another center if we want to, or we take Walter Clayton. Right now we have point guard. And then you have Andrew Wiggins, that's your small forward, and you have Book, that's your shooting guard, and then either you keep or you cut Duncan Robinson or Terry Rozier. And it's like, okay, well, I got Grayson Allen, I got Royce O'Neal. I can trade you for maybe some younger guys that have less value than you, and maybe I can get a couple second round picks. Maybe I can get a protected first round pick. Uh, I think keeping one of them is fine, but honestly, neither are the prototypical forwards that I would put next to Devin Booker, and they're not getting any younger. And I think they both regressed last year, especially on the defensive side of things. So there's a lot of options there, but again, a lot of it hinges on what does your team look like after Kevin Durant gets traded.
Yeah, I think you said that perfectly, and I feel like this main sentiment, like you said, after Kevin Durant trade, that's kind of the uncertainty with the Phoenix Suns too. Is like we don't know what we're going to be getting back. There could be 3 teams, 4 teams. It could be a 2-for-2 deal with 2 teams. We necessarily don't know, and I think, like you mentioned, the starting center is the key point with trading for Yusuf Nurkic. Regardless if you loved him or hate him, he wasn't that starting center that the Suns desperately needed for this team. And then obviously Nick Richards, I thought would be a little bit better, I won't lie. I think he's more of like a fringe starting center, but really good backup center, like a lot of people mentioned. And for the Suns, having him around a $5 million would be very solid. Oso still has some developmental keys, and I still think can continue to grow within this Suns team. So I really do like him. And you mentioned Thomas Sorber. That's one of my guys. I'm really, really high on him in the draft. I'm hoping that he can fall and the Suns can get him, because I really think that Jordan Ott can use that defensive mobility that he presents, and in the low post and stuff like that. I know he worked with Evan Mobley. He's not as great offensively, can't stretch up to the 3-point line, but I think he could be that defensive beast that he kind of molded in with the DPOY kind of, and I think that could be really intriguing with the Suns, especially alongside Khalil Ware, which would be very key. But I think the key point you mentioned was they don't have to trade both of them. They can really kind of keep one of them. I would personally rather keep Royce, just because his contract's a little bit cheaper, and I think we do need wing more than shooting guard. Even though I do like Grayson Allen, I just don't think his fit is really here with this Suns team. And similar to Yusuf Nurkic last season, he makes, I believe, the 4th most on this roster. So he's kind of the only other really tradable contract you have outside of the big 3, which obviously can change when they do move up some other guys, but it makes it a little bit easier for the Suns. But I would love for them to kind of get a little bit younger. One team that I had kind of in mind for, or 2 teams now that I think about it, for Grayson Allen that I think he could really thrive in is Portland and Detroit. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that, because I think they kind of desperately need some shooting alongside Orlando as well for Goga Batazde. Like you mentioned, I think before the Bane trade, it was a little bit more likely. It still could very happen, but what are your kind of thoughts on those?
What would you get back from Portland and Detroit?
Ooh.
Are you getting like Robert Williams?
So for Portland, maybe there's a possible way that you could swing 11 if you also get like pick 14 or pick 20. Maybe there's a way you could trade up to try to get a pick like that. Or, like you said, I think a Robert Williams, I think like a Matisse Thybulle wouldn't necessarily be really worth it. I don't think a Denny Avdija would be traded. So I would say a Robert Williams. And then from Detroit, I think Detroit for Isaiah Stewart probably, or maybe a future first.
Yeah, I think if you don't get a good center back in the KD trade and you have the ability to go try and get Robert Williams or get Isaiah Stewart for Grayson Allen, I think I'd probably rather do Isaiah Stewart, considering the age and the health concerns as well. Even though he's had some of his own right, it's certainly not on the level of Robert Williams. I'm sure you saw up close and personal with Boston.
Yeah.
Even though when he's on, when he's going, he's one of the best vertical spacing centers in the game. He's still an elite shot blocker despite the injuries. And in theory, having Robert Williams on last year's team would have been elite. But again, in theory, Robert Williams also wouldn't be injured all the time.
Yep.
So I think you go with Isaiah Stewart there. If you're getting a pick or a second-round pick or something involved, that's great. I don't know if Detroit gives up Stewart. I know it's almost time to pay Jalen Duren, but Stewart's under a pretty decent contract and seems like somebody who definitely embraces that city, embraces that mindset. But they do need shooting, especially along some of their young guys, like their Thompson twin, of course, and Ron Holland the second and everything. Like, yeah, you need some good shooting. I don't know if Grayson Allen has that type of value. I don't know if Royce O'Neal has that type of value as well. I think the same way that teams are lowballing on Kevin Durant or reportedly low on him is the same reason a lot of guys are going to look at these role players and say, I think I can buy low on them. Like, I think I can look at Grayson Allen. I'm not paying for Grayson Allen coming off of his 47% from deep season. I'm paying for Grayson Allen coming off of the dad weight season. This is the things I'm going to say if I'm the Orlando Magic or the Portland Trailblazers. So, I also wouldn't just get rid of those guys for nothing, right? So if you can swing a Robert Williams, if you can swing an Isaiah Stewart, that's great. If you can swing a decent draft pick, that's great. Other than that, you're not really planning on being super competitive next year anyway. Maybe they can up their value and you could trade them at the trade deadline, or you get under the second apron and you can aggregate them with something and get a bigger piece in return.
Yeah, I kind of did forget about the fact that with them hopefully waiving Vasily Misic and maybe Cody Martin in these next couple of days. I know Gerald said a couple of weeks ago or months ago to me on your guys' show that the contracts are the 28th and the 29th for them. So those are going to be coming up soon for us. So that'll be something to kind of keep in mind when the Suns do drop below the first apron as well, because they can combo those guys. And I think they make around like $27 million, but with them being in the first, they can also take back more salary. So that would also free up some things. But like you mentioned, the value with them also not the greatest. And no team is really trying to help out anybody, right? No team is trying to help out the Phoenix Suns. That's kind of the main question and concern, which we'll get into the next guy a little bit here, Bradley Beal. But no one's really helping the Phoenix Suns take on these contracts or, I guess, helping them unless they give them something in return or something valuable, right? So maybe that's kind of how they're feeling about a guy like Grayson or Royce as well with that value too.
Yeah, also going into this season, if you play them and they play well, then you might just say you're going to get a lot more playing time now than on a contender that might want to trade for you. Go out there and audition, or we'll use you, obviously. We'll pretend like we're going to keep you. And then if you go out there and you have a way better year, maybe we can flip you for a little bit more. It feels weird to say there are relatively low stakes, though, for this upcoming Suns season, even though everything feels like life or death right now. It feels like we're the laughing stock in the center of the NBA universe. Once this season gets going, unless this return for Kevin Durant is out of this world, unless Brian Gregory navigates the free agency and the draft like a god, right? We're most likely going into next season saying, hey, let's go have some fun, right? Let's go out there, let's just hoop, and let's have some sort of identity. Let's show that we're building something. It's a great opportunity for veterans in the league to up their trade value, especially if they want to still compete and win on decent chunk contracts. So there's a chance that Grayson Allen gets this leeway that he had when he was in the starting lineup 2 years ago. There's a chance that Royce O'Neal, gets a more consistent role, and maybe that just shows off more of his hot streaks instead of more of his cold streaks, right? And it's a good season for him. It's interesting to kind of see which way it could go, but at the end of the day, there is opportunity there, which is I think why some people are overreacting when they think the Suns are just stuck and they have nothing, even with the KD thing. There are options, there are avenues. And maybe the best ones are unlikely, but there's a lot of them to go down, and you never know which ones might pay off.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I know a lot of people are kind of in this doomsday scenario with the Phoenix Suns, kind of thinking the worst going into next season. But I kind of analyzed it that even if they are at best a 6 seed, 7 seed, maybe even if they are a 8, 9 seed in the play-in, as long as they're competitive, playing in the second half, not falling asleep in the third quarter, collapsing in the fourth, not hustling for loose balls. And Jordan Ott clearly made that known at the press conference that is going to change. They're going to play connective. They're going to hustle. They're going to play on both sides of the ball. So I think this season, regardless of the record that we see with the Phoenix Suns, we're going to see a more entertaining team, a team that the fans are actually going to buy into more. And I think that is just great for the Phoenix Suns as a whole to ultimately go into that next direction too with Devin Booker in this new lead.
They have a lot of work to do here locally. There was this big upswell right before Matt Ishbia came in and bought. Obviously, there's the finals run, and even with the playoff exits, there was still high expectations, lots of regular season wins. Ishbia comes in, makes this massive move, does a lot of great stuff as well, makes the arena prices more affordable, gives out free antennas for people to watch TV, upgrades the Mercury facilities, just pours money into everything. Goes out there and makes these huge moves that were widely loved by people here locally when they're made, and now you're public enemy number one. And that's just the way that the world goes, and that just shows how much damage 1 or 2 bad seasons can do to a franchise, especially ones that have high expectations and a fan base that just recently got a taste. Right? It's you just started eating good food and now you got to go back to eating crap. And it's wait, I was just getting used to first class. Why do I have to stop doing this? And it's well, I still paid a first class price. I'm still having first class expectations, but now I'm getting, third class meals, right? That's what the Phoenix Suns have been recently. And so every single fan, even the biggest fans, even the biggest optimists, including myself, which I think I fall, closer to that side of the spectrum, is going into next season saying, yeah, you're going to have to show me first. Like you're gonna have to do something before I actually believe that you are different, but I don't think that what they have to do is necessarily the hardest or highest bar to clear.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely going to be difficult to kind of navigate through these obstacles, trying to find the perfect way to navigate it, not only just for the front office and the roster to be satisfied, the fans to be satisfied, because not everyone is obviously going to be happy. But I'm hoping that with me and you kind of being on Team Optimism, I know there's not a lot of people in Team Optimism camp, but the true people that are in Team Optimism can hopefully see that shining light bright come through this season with the Suns and hopefully brighten up the valley. I know today was 116, so maybe not today, but in October, November, December, hopefully it can be very, very great. And then lastly, Eric, before we sign off, I want to go over some draft guys with you, potentially looking at some pieces. I know on PHNX you kind of talked about some guys yesterday that you liked, but I want to really kind of pick your brain on two topics of the draft. Obviously, right around pick 29, because that's where the Suns are stated now. And then if they could trade up between pick 10 to pick 20, where they're rumored to get a pick from one of those 4-team trades, who you would really like. So if you have at least one guy or two guys from each of those spots that you really like, just let them know for the fans.
I think if you're 9 and 10 and you can steal one of Carter Bryant, Kaman Malawak, or Yegor Demon, if you can steal one of those three at 10 or 9, if somehow the Raptors get involved, I think that's a pretty big win for you. If your middle ground more 14, if a Colin Murray Boyles falls to you, I think that's a good pick. I'm interested because kind of like 15 to like 30 something, there's a lot of up and down. So if you're like late teens, you mentioned Thomas Sorber. I like Thomas Sorber a lot. I like him a lot. I like Hansen Yang out of China as well. And it might be a reach at 29. It might not. But I do think that him, Kalkbrenner are realistic options. Maybe Maxime Reynaud as well. They all have their concerns, and we know that some players with big concerns, especially big men, they sometimes slide in the draft. So I wonder if one of those names is there at 29, or if, maybe it's considered a reach to go for one of those. I like Rasheer Fleming at 29 as well. I think Fleming probably goes closer to 20. So if you get there, or if you somehow let him fall, because again that happens, I really like Rasheer. So there's a lot of names, man. I think one thing about this draft, and covering the college basketball season before with ASU, as well as doing some more deep dives into players and whatnot, I think one thing I've learned about this draft is that from like 18 to like 45, there's such a unique group of players that I look at and I'm like, you know what? I could see really any possible scenario. Like Neek Clifford, I could see Neek Clifford being an absolute bucket walking into the league, averaging close to 20. I can also see him having a tough time adjusting. And it's like, why did this guy go in the top 20? There's a lot of really great names. I really hope they're able to go up to 10. Or somewhere around there. But at the same time, I think even if you're at 29, there's a chance that you get not a game changer, but an impact player there.
Yeah, and last year they found those impact players late in the draft as well. Ryan Dunn, Osu Ighodaro, guys that were able to, establish themselves into this kind of core, and I think can build themselves as well into this core for the Phoenix Suns into the future. One thing that you mentioned with kind of what you want to target is bigs, and you clearly stated that with all your draft picks here. I think that if the Suns don't get one in a trade via Kevin Durant, that's kind of the position they have to go, because I think the benefit of this team trying to rebuild as well is potentially if you do strike on that big market and you do get a nice big, you have him on that rookie scale contract, which allows to build him alongside Devin Booker and kind of keep this core intact, so you don't have to go out and trade for that said star to really bring in. Maybe in free agency, when some salary cap is relieved, you can use some money in free agency or some other tradable contracts to go and get a $20-30 million complimentary player to kind of build throughout with this team, because I do think we can kind of agree the big three build is not going to really be happening in Phoenix anytime soon. It's going to be kind of going down to either this one construction with Booker or maybe two kind of guys kind of leaning into that with complementary pieces. And all the guys you mentioned from the draft here, Carter Bryant, I really like. I think he could be a great little filler piece for the Suns at the wing. Kaman Malawak, I would love for the Suns to get there as well. He's one of the guys that I think could potentially go top 5, top 6, and if he fell to 9 or 10 and the Suns were there, he would be the guy that I'm definitely striking gold on. And then you mentioned Colin Murray Boyles around 14. He's a guy that's around that spot. And like you mentioned, there's a lot of guys that are just from like 10, 12 to 20 that are really gauging, and then from 20 to like 40 that are really just all over the place. So it's going to be interesting to see with, it also not being a very heavy center draft with mainly guards and wings, how some of these teams kind of trade up and trade down, because there's teams like Brooklyn who have multiple firsts, Utah that have multiple firsts, and they're definitely going to be moving to try to move up and down, which may leave some teams to strike at picks that might be surprising, and hopefully, like you said, have the Suns to have some guys to fall, maybe like a Rasheer Fleming or a Thomas Sorber right into their lap to where they can select that guy and be very happy like they were last year.
Somebody always falls. There's always a story, even if it's to the end of the teens, like Dalton Connect last year. Bronny James. No, and I think the same way in the second round. I think trading up in the second round might end up being a great option for the Suns. I'm always glass half full. I'm depressed by Arizona sports, but I can always talk myself into a retool, into success happening soon. And I don't have faith that Brian Gregory is going to do well. But if he does do well and he has a good draft and he gets a good return for the KD trade and he signs one or two good free agents and maybe there's a good Royce or Grayson trade and Ott was the right hire, which is a lot of ifs, and usually not all of that happens at once, especially, all positive things at once for this franchise. But if a majority of those things happen, I think you're looking at, 2-3 years from now, you're probably going to look to pair another star next to Devin Booker on the foundation that you built this season. So there's a lot of exciting parts of that, and I think that's why it is a fun time to be in this space, covering it in whatever capacity you can cover it in.
Yeah, it's definitely amazing and definitely interesting for the Phoenix Suns. One of the most, I guess, drama-ensued seasons kind of coming into play with a lot of stuff revolving around the team. So, like you mentioned, it's going to be very interesting to see how they are able to retool and kind of figure out these ifs that are really kind of persisting from some of the fans out there on the outside. But Erik, I want to say thank you once again for hopping on Suns Digest, talking some basketball and breaking down the Phoenix Suns with me here over today. Once again, if you guys do not follow Erik, which I'm sure you already do, if you follow him, follow me, you definitely follow him. Check him out over at PHNX Sports, where he does coverage for the Sun Devils and for PHNX Suns, where they go live every single day at 3 p.m. Eastern, going over everything for the Phoenix Suns for you guys over there, breaking down some stuff. I'll definitely be checking out you guys out tomorrow in the chat, hanging out and having some fun. But once again, Erik, thank you for joining, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, thanks for always being in there. Thanks for always chatting it up, bringing good ideas, and also thanks for being a good part of the space, right? Like sports media, it's a big world, it's a small circle, but there's a lot of crap out there, right? There's a lot of people who are just doing stuff the wrong way, and I'm big on making sure that we show our support to outlets, to individuals, to whoever it might be that doesn't approach things in this bad way that sometimes earns you success in this industry. So yeah, man, happy to jump on at any time, and let's do it again sometime soon. 100%.
We'll definitely have some more chats here over on the channel, and thank you all for tuning in here, hanging out. If you guys were watching, fans of Erik or fans of Suns Digest, we really do appreciate you guys being here on this Thursday evening when obviously the NBA Finals is going on. So really do appreciate taking your time out of the day to tune in with us with that. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll definitely catch you next week and in some more videos with some more Sun stuff going over this team. There's going to be a lot of content dropping over the next couple of days, so you definitely want to stay intact. But catch you guys later. Have a great rest of your night, and go Phoenix Suns.